I'm Asian American. I grew up in Canada, traditional immigrant family. And like many Asian Americans, it's kind of a, lack of a better term, a metrics-based household, right? So there's a focus on academics, there's a focus on grades, there's a focus on test scores. And I think a lot of times when I talk to people of similar cultural backgrounds, they go through similar things where it almost defines them, right? Where you go to school and what grades you get. And I think that there is definitely a cultural component that kind of feeds into those perfectionistic tendencies.
Welcome to Success Reimagined. I am Dr. Amna Shabbir, your host on this journey to thrive at the intersection of ambition and wellness. In every episode, I'll help you challenge outdated definitions of success, discover practical tools and strategies for growth without compromising your well-being. I am so glad you've joined me. Let's reimagine what's possible together. It's a true honor to welcome today's guest, Dr. Kevin Poe. Dr. Poe is a practicing internal medicine physician and founder of KevinMD.com, one of the most legendary and influential healthcare platforms in the world. Since 2004, KevinMD has become a powerful voice in medicine, amplifying the stories of thousands of clinicians and giving space to topics often left unspoken. He's been featured in outlets like CNN, the New York Times, and the Washington Post, and is widely recognized as a pioneer in helping physicians share their voices online. Today, we turn the lens inward to talk about perfectionism, the hidden pressures in medicine, and what it truly means to reimagine success. Dr. Poe, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
You have interviewed hundreds, if not thousands, of physicians, including me, when I was just starting out on this journey of actually what I call my unsilencing. So first of all, I guess I should start with gratitude for giving me space, both in written and verbal form, to share.
Well, again, thank you so much. And whenever I hear stories like yours, it's always inspiring because when I started this 20 plus years ago, right, there weren't very many physician platforms, and to see how it's grown and to see the difference it's made and to see the influence that it's had on other clinicians and those across the healthcare spectrum, really it's gratifying. And I'd be lying to say that this was planned from the beginning, but it purely wasn't. So this is just happenstance as it's been going on.
It is truly remarkable. I would love to take us a little bit backstage further into your journey and what really inspired you to start this platform. Ever since I entered medicine in my conscious awareness, KevinMD.com has been there. And so it's amazing it has that global impact.
Well, it started about, like I said, 20 plus years ago. And I think that blogs at that time were in its infancy, right? And I remember writing a piece on KevinMD.com, and then it was, I think, on some news article, right? And then the next day when I was seeing a patient in the exam room, that patient had mentioned that she had read my blog online. And that was kind of that aha moment for me where I realized that as physicians, we can use these online platforms not only to talk to patients one-on-one in the exam room, but one-to-many outside of the exam room. And I think that power has grown in importance over the years because now we have platforms where we can talk about health information and studies that our patients are reading, but we can also use it to advocate for changes in our healthcare system. And we can also use that platform where we can come together, share some of our vulnerabilities, and share some of the ways we can overcome some of these common obstacles that we as physicians all face in healthcare.
Very well said. I mean, this is a question that's in my mind right now, and I really just want to go ahead and ask, how have you maintained this consistency? And the platform has grown, but to continue to show up, you're still in your, as I've heard you in other interviews say, first job out of residency, and you're practicing full time, and to have that stamina to continue to grow and have that insight, I would love to hear that.
Well, let me just correct you. I don't practice full-time. I'm half-time. So I see patients Monday, Tuesdays, and half days, Wednesdays, and then Thursdays and Fridays. Then that's when I do my podcast, and that's when I do my interviews as well. So I find that blend to be really, really rewarding because I do my primary care internal medicine practice, and that's rewarding in its own aspects. But as you know, it's very difficult to do primary care and to practice medicine full-time. There's a lot of frustrations and obstacles in our healthcare system. But having that blend where I do clinical medicine half time, and then the other half, I do things related to KevinMD, and that kind of feeds my entrepreneurial spirit. On the podcast, like you said, I've interviewed thousands of people across the healthcare spectrum. And every time I interview one of them, I learn something new. So I find that I have the privilege to interview my guests. And it's really the only time where I can have 15 to 20 minutes dedicated of their time. I can ask them anything I want, and I just learn something new. So it's been a tremendous privilege. I'm the type of person that when I find something that I like, I will stick with it. And like you said, that I am in my first job after residency. So I've been doing my job. Let me see, I graduated residency back in 2002. That's about 23 years now. I am in my job. So it's the same thing with KevinMD. I think that I've also done that for 20 plus years as well. And if I didn't find it rewarding, if I didn't find that I'm noticing the difference I'm making, then that's not something that I would have stayed. I think having that rewarding feeling and knowing that I'm making a difference, whether I'm inside the exam room with patients doing primary care or talking to fine folks like yourself and knowing making a difference outside of the exam room, I think that's one of the biggest motivations of me keeping going.
Definitely hear a sense of like purpose and fulfillment tying together with what you've shared. Shifting our focus just a little bit, this project that I've been working on and now sharing with everyone, it circles around perfectionism and how we are redefining success for ourselves in a variety of ways. I'm curious, did you ever grapple with perfectionism? And if so, how did it show up in your life and career?
Yeah, I think every doctor grapples with perfectionism because we wouldn't be where we are if we weren't perfectionists in the first place. I talk to a lot of medical students, pre-medical students. My daughter is a pre-medical student. And in order to get into medical school, you have to have perfectionistic tendencies, right? If you think of all the hoops that we have to jump through, all the way in pre-med, you have to do all your clinical shadowing, volunteering, clinical hours, and then study rigorous pre-medical courses and then go through the MCAT. And that only continues, right? Because once you're in medical school, you have the USMLE, step 1, 2, 3. And then after that, you residency, board exam. So I think that jumping through these hoops and jumping through all these metric-based obstacles forces every single physician to be perfectionist in some way. And I do think that mindset sometimes leads us to burnout, right? Because the more we focus on being perfect, the less compassion that we have for ourselves. And I think that's a perfect storm for burnout. And you don't need me to tell you that 50+% of clinicians are burnt out now. And I think partly, of course, is the system itself, but I think also that physicians in general don't have enough compassion for themselves. Like they hold themselves too high a standard. So if something is wrong, something is off a little bit, they take it so hard. And that can't be good for anyone's mindset.
I have to agree with that 100% as somebody who struggles with both a high level of self-criticism, a low level of self-compassion. And later on, I found out that is what happens in perfectionism and in individuals with perfectionistic tendencies. There's data that suggests that we are more self-critical and less self-compassionate. Going back a little bit further, take us back into this is more behind the scenes
Sure.
kind of conversation. How have growing up in a different environment, culturally, familially, or internally, are there components of that made you feel that you have to be perfect or perform in a very specific way?
I think you're right. Obviously, I'm Asian American. I grew up in Canada, traditional immigrant family. And like many Asian Americans, it's kind of a lack of a better term, a metrics-based household, right? So there's a focus on academics, there's a focus on grades, there's a focus on test scores. And I think a lot of times when I talk to people of similar cultural backgrounds, they go through similar things where it almost defines them, right? Where you go to school and what grades you get. And I think that there is definitely a cultural component that kind of feeds into those perfectionistic tendencies. Sometimes I get caught myself into doing those similar things. I try to be more mindful of that and the effect that they may have on my own kids. But I certainly do think that there's a strong cultural component to being more focused on metrics.
You remembered that moment when yourself growing up, you had that metric-based expectations. And I can so relate because I feel that the checklist my parents provide me is still not ending.
Mhm.
And I laugh with them. And now with the work that I do, they can recognize this a little bit more. But yeah, the list, it's always there. It's perpetual. Was there a moment in time, either in childhood or when you look back, that you felt wow, like that was a moment where I felt a lot of pressure.
Yeah. So, of course, there's a lot of pressure, and I'm sure that you could relate. There wasn't a single moment where I realized that there has to be more than life than just numbers, right? I think that having my family, having my kids, I think that was a pretty big indicator in terms of reevaluating the priorities in my life. I talked to a lot of guests where they realize, sometimes unfortunately too late, that life is more than what they do in the clinic. Life is more than how much money they make and the prestige that you get. Sometimes you have to ask yourself, how do you want to be remembered after you die, right? Do you want to be remembered for being a great father, a great husband, a great family man, or do you want to be remembered for doing something in a clinic or working in a hospital? And I think it's very difficult to have everything, right? Because if you want to focus more on family, by definition, there's only a limited amount of resources that you have. Sometimes your career has to suffer and vice versa, right? If you focus so much on your career, sometimes your family is going to suffer, right? And I talk to a lot of physicians whose parents are physicians, and they remember back in the day that their fathers may never be at home, right? They're always in the hospital. And I think it goes down to the question, how do you want to be remembered after you die? And that's kind of been a guiding principle for me. So I personally want to be remembered for being a wonderful father to my kids, because you're only a father once, right? Your kids are only young once, but medicine is there forever. You could always go back to medicine. There's always more patients to see. There's always more procedures that you can do, but your kids are only young once. So I think once I made that realization, that helped me reevaluate my priorities.
We went deep into legacy building right there and perspective taking as stepping away at that. That was really well said and powerful. I invite everyone to go back and listen to what you just said, because we are so close to the problem and what we're thinking in our day to day that we forget to step back and have that moment of introspection. What am I doing this for? And who are the individuals in my life that will get affected from it? Absolutely. So, going a little bit into the amazing and countless interviews you've done and personal essays you've read, from memoirs to like very system based, what are three of the most common patterns? And I know I picked three, you
Mhm.
can go less or
Sure.
more, but patterns that you see clinicians or other individuals in healthcare feel like they're struggling with, and they appear outwardly successful. But as we talked about in insight, there's a struggle going on.
I thought about this question, so I came up with three. I think the first, number one, is isolation, right? Because I think to doctors today, we're more siloed than ever. We have the proverbial doctor's lounge, and that's no longer a thing. And doctors are just practicing in their own silo. There's less interaction with their fellow colleagues. And sometimes, if a physician is struggling with something in the hospital or clinic, they sometimes may feel like they're the only ones dealing with that problem. And that's simply not the case. So that's why I think it's important for platforms like mine and podcasts like yours. There's a variety of Facebook groups that are out there that really act as that doctor's lounge and makes doctor realize that they're not alone, and whatever they're going through, whether it's in a clinic or the challenges of managing work and life, so many family issues, relationship issues that we see in these physician groups, that these doctors aren't going through that alone. So I think there is a theme of isolation that is out there. And I encourage physicians who aren't on these platforms to maybe find a group or tribe that suits them, because having that support and making you realize that you're not doing this alone is tremendously important. So that's number one. Number two, I think there's a mismatch between values and reality. Some may call that moral injury, right? Because you go into medicine expecting that you're going to be caring for patients in a certain way, but the system doesn't give you the tools to do so, right? For instance, in primary care, there's always a push towards more productivity, more RVUs, and meeting these metrics. There's less of an emphasis on the time that we spend with patients, the communication that we spend with patients, because those aren't objectively valued by our healthcare system. And sometimes that disconnect leads to this moral injury that physicians often bear. And, and of course, that leads to burnout as well. So that's, of course, a common theme. And then the third is, I think there's a shame around vulnerability. I think we talk about vulnerability a lot on my podcast, and I'm sure that you talked about it as well. And we are trained in medicine to not show any weakness, right? Whether you're in medical school or in residency, and even calling it for a sick day, right? That's often looked down upon. And I think that goes into the self-compassion discussion that we had earlier. I think doctors need more compassion for themselves. And I think that's going to lead them to a better mental place when it comes to preventing burnout. So there is no shame to being vulnerable. Again, that is one of the functions of the platforms that we host. I think it's important for physicians to share their story and be open about the vulnerabilities they face, because if they share that vulnerability, they're going to realize that there are other physicians who are going through the exact same thing that they are.
That was extremely well said in terms of that trifecta. I could see myself in there 100%. And it's true. It's the shame and the moral injury and the loneliness, they all three of them get wrapped up. And before we know it, we are just different humans. And it's like medicine tends to dehumanize us while we're taking care of the most vulnerable, frail individuals that are out there. And finding our community is so, so important. What came to my mind was also this very real performative aspect of medicine where we're struggling in silence, and yet we have to put up this face where we have it all together.
No, absolutely. I think that a lot of doctors, we struggle in silence, right? So I think it's important, like you said, to kind of be open and honest in terms of some of the struggles that we go through. There is no shame in doing that.
Absolutely. With all the perspectives that you've witnessed over the years and your own evolution over time, how have you personally reimagined success and what that means to you today?
Yeah. So I think that a lot of doctors, like I said earlier, we jump through a lot of hoops to get to where we are. And then finally, when you reach that finish line, I hear so many doctors say, is that all there is to it? Is this it? Right? Because without having the next goal to attain, they're lost, right? Because ever since that they were in whatever high school, right? They always wanted to perhaps become a doctor. And that path is just full of metrics-based goals that we have to attain. And once there is no more metrics, a lot of doctors often feel lost, right? So personally, I think what I do with my platform at KevinMD, that to me has been a wonderful reward, a wonderful goal. I don't know how I can measure the impact I have, because that's something that for me defines success, because obviously I want to make a difference. I don't have specific metrics for that. It's not like I count how many doctors I reach or how many doctors I influence. But of course, hearing you and meeting a lot of doctors say they've read KevinMD since they were in medical school, or I listened to this podcast and it made a difference in my life, and I get occasional emails like that. And to me, that is success, right? So I don't need to know what percentage of doctors that I've influenced, but just kind of hearing occasional stories, occasional anecdotes, to me is tremendously rewarding, and for me is a marker of success.
So, as we wrap up for today, Dr. Poe, for all the high achievers listening, whether they're physicians, whether they are other individuals in healthcare, and maybe these are the pre-med students, anyone who is listening and they're afraid to redefine success and they're afraid to just loosen that really the metric-based identity, what advice would you give to them?
Sure. The first piece of advice I would share is that your voice matters. I think that a lot of our healthcare system, the decisions that are being made by people who aren't in clinical medicine. So it's important for us in healthcare to speak up and advocate for our patients and advocate for ourselves. Because if we don't speak up for ourselves and if we don't speak up for our patients, then others, perhaps politicians and administrators, they're going to make these decisions for us. So I think that we need to be involved in these type of healthcare decisions. So whether it means speaking up and advocating as a medical student, or if you're already a practicing physician, getting involved in leadership and being at the table for these decisions, I think is tremendously important. And number two is that start small when it comes to speaking up. You don't need to be perfect and have this multifaceted, multi-pronged platform whenever you have your voice. just simply writing an article. You could contribute it to KevinMD, or they could appear on their podcast. They could write an opinion piece in a newspaper. There are so many different ways where you can share your voice. There are so many platforms that are out there. You have all these TikTok physicians who have their own voice and they're tremendously powerful. They have millions of followers. So I think pick a medium that suits your personality and suits your strengths. And in this day and age, there is a medium to fit every single personality and strength. So start small. And then that's a great way to start with your voice. And then finally is that don't be afraid to be vulnerable, because sometimes when you share your story, as I mentioned earlier, that story that you share, that vulnerability you share, can save lives, can make a difference, can save a life from someone else who is reading that. So don't be afraid to be vulnerable online. So those would be my 3 tips to those listening.
Excellent pieces of advice, and we should all hold on to that wisdom, starting small and using our voice and being honest as we show up in our whatever our medium of choice is. Absolutely. Dr. Poe, how can individuals learn more about you, the ones that don't know you? Because I have a significant amount of audience that is also non-clinicians, and I'm really appreciative of that. Please share all the links and all the places. I'll have them in the show notes as well, but please.
Sure. So, of course, you just go to KevinMD.com, which is the main platform where I have thousands of contributors share their stories every day. I have a daily podcast that I've been doing for 3 to 4 years now. We are approaching 2,000 episodes. And you could subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast, or you could find it on your favorite podcast platform, and you could listen to the guests there. And what I like about the podcast is that sometimes when you read an article, it's much different from hearing it from the authors themselves, as you know. So kevinmd.com and kevinmd.com/podcast.
And I highly encourage for anyone who has yet not heard about the platform, and I know that those are very far and few between, please check out Dr. Poe's platform, because if you truly want to know what's happening in healthcare and how your healthcare workers are feeling and how they're being treated, this would be a great platform to educate yourself and advocate for all healthcare workers. Thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Poe.
Thank you so much for having me.
This episode is part of a special series and my budding book project on unmasking perfectionism. Thanks so much for spending time with me today. Just a quick reminder, while I am a physician, I'm not your physician, and nothing in this podcast is medical advice or any kind of professional advice. Everything shared here is based on my personal experiences, and the views expressed are entirely my own. If you enjoyed today's episode, I would love for you to rate, review, subscribe, and share the show with anyone who might need a little inspiration to redefine their own version of success. I'll see you next time. Until then, keep reimagining success one small step at a time.